Good afternoon, everybody, and apologies for that slight delay with coming to you live this afternoon. We did have some technical issues broadcasting from Zoom to YouTube, but hopefully we are with you now. So welcome to this slow-looking session from Royal Collection Trust. This is a session that we run regularly throughout the year as part of our digital programme, and there'll be a little bit more information about the digital programme for you at the end of this session. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. I think probably after that delayed technical start there, we all need a moment of mindfulness, stepping away from the stresses of everyday life and work commitments. And by chance, we've managed to coincide this event with Mental Health Awareness Week here in the UK, which this week is about community. So thank you for joining our online community today. And we're actually going to talk about a work which is currently on display at the Palace of Holyroodhouse in Edinburgh. That's His Majesty the King's official residence in Scotland. And we have a special display there featuring two works by the 17th century female artist Artemisia Gentileschi. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Lucia van der Drift from the Limina Collective and Amy Parish, an assistant curator of paintings for Royal Collection Trust. Thank you both for joining me this afternoon. Lucia, can you share your screen, please, so we can all see the wonderful painting that we're going on this afternoon?
Here we go.
Thank you. So this is an oil on canvas. It's a painting called Self-Portrait of the Allegory of Painting. Lucia, Amy, let's just talk a little bit before we start on why we've chosen to focus on this particular work.
I just thought it was a very striking painting, and particularly the position of her body and her arms and her hands. And it's a self-portrait. I just thought it was wonderful. But let's see, what would you think?
Yeah, and this painting belonged to Charles I and is the only known work by Artemisia to have been produced during her stay in London. It's also one of her finest works and a great representation of herself. So I'm really looking forward to us talking about it.
Yes, me too. So, Amy, shall I ask my quick-fire questions? Or?
Yeah, Lucia, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so before we are going to go more deeply looking at the painting, just wanted to just ask a few questions and see what you make of them. For instance, what words would you use to describe this painting? So to get us connected, what words would you use to describe this painting? So there's no right or wrong here. And another question is, do you feel there's anything missing in the painting? Is there anything missing in the painting? And then the last question to tease our brains. What would you change about this painting? What would you change about this painting? Well, that was just a few questions too, because I think when we looking at any kind of work, we probably have a lot of thoughts that we're thinking about, and somehow, hopefully, we can put these questions to rest for a bit and just concentrate on looking at the work without the questions coming in the way. But let's see how we get on. I'd like to just say a few things about, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Yeah, I just thought I'd tell you a bit about myself and the organization I'm working for, which is Limina Collective, and basically myself and my colleague Carly, and we usually work in museums, working with art collections, artworks, and combining that with mindfulness. And yep, that's all I want to say about it. I think we're a bit over time anyway, so let's just keep that bit brief. I'd like us, before we start looking, to do a short meditative practice, just see what you make of it, to kind of prepare us for the looking. So I invite you to feel your feet on the ground. You might have to shuffle them around a bit. And maybe even pressing the feet into the floor a bit so you can feel that floor underneath and the muscles flexing. So knees hip width apart. I've got my hands in my lap. And now I invite you to either lower the gaze or just close your eyes for a few moments. Just a few moments of quiet and calm, perhaps. Sometimes it's not calm at all, but that's also okay. Just feeling the body on the chair, the weight of the body. So you're really feeling your bottom on that chair. Perhaps a backrest as well. And perhaps if you want to, just tuning into your breath for a bit, noticing the in-breath and the out-breath, and noticing the in-breath, noticing the out-breath, and again just noticing that breath coming in, and then it just leaving the body and maybe taking away some of the tension if there is any. Also invite you to listen to some sounds. And then perhaps join in with me, making a small shoulder roll. Shoulders back and then moving the shoulders forward. Maybe perhaps just loosening your body up a little bit, shaking it a bit. Well, thank you for joining me for that mindful pause. I'm going to share my screen again so we can see the painting again. Here we are. And I'd just like to tell you where the painting is now in Edinburgh. And so in the Palace of Holyroodhouse. So here we have it with the big red arrow and that glorious wooden paneling around it. And a bit closer up, the painting as it can be seen on the wall. So we've seen, this is a self-portrait as the Allegory of Painting. It's in Italian, it's called La Pittura. And you can see it's painted around 1638-39, and you can also see the dates of the artist, born in 1593 and she died in 1652. And there's also the height and the width, so you just relate a bit more because it's sometimes a bit difficult when we got an image on the screen and it's oil on canvas. So I'm going to guide you into some slow looking now. And bringing the painting closer. So let's just spend some time quietly looking at this painting. Getting used to it. A bit like allowing your eyes to get used to the dark. Just slowly starting to take in more detail. I'm resting the eyes in the background. Finding different tones here, different tones of brown. And perhaps also finding a vertical there as well, with contrasting colors on either side. Feel your body as you're looking. Feel into your body. Feel your feet on the ground. Feeling your bottom on the chair as you're looking. And also feeling into the upper part of your own body. Noting the positions of your shoulder, your arms, your head, and your hands. And then resting your eyes on the figure in the painting, clearly noting her posture, the position of her back, her shoulders, the angle of her head and face, the arm that is raised, and the arm nearest to us. Let's look more closely at that arm. And perhaps first noticing a necklace with a pendant dangling from it. Let's explore the sleeve, its fabric. Clearly noticing folds. And the sleeve gathered at the upper arm. Noticing the different colors on this sleeve. Browns and greens. Some white at the cuff. And some white at the lining of her garment at the top. And perhaps also noticing that lighter tone of white at the shoulder, indicating the fabric reflecting the light. Finding the darkest areas of this sleeve, deep into the folds. And also noting where the sleeve is meeting that brown of her garment at the top. Perhaps also noticing the back of that garment. A hint of a waistband and a skirt. Now let's look at her hand. A thumb coming out of a palette. The knuckle of an index finger. And the rest of the hand underneath that palette. the hand resting on what looks like a small table. And then the shape of that palette. Or palette. The edges of it. Its surface. Can you see any colors on that surface? Dots of paint. Let's look at the whole painting now. And noticing different colors used here. The green of the sleeve we've already looked at. Different hues and tones of brown mixed with black in her hair. Pinks and creams of skin. And some reds in the face. Let's look more closely at her face. Noticing where the painted light is reflected on her face. On the forehead. And the tip of the nose. Noticing the locks of hair framing the face. The shape of those locks. The individual hairs. And the hair lower in the neck in a bun. A lace edge of the dress around her shoulder and chest. And the necklace with its links. Different sizes of links. Different positions of the links and also that shadow cast by the necklace onto her chest. Then let's look again at her face, her chin, the curve of the mouth, the upper lip, nose, eyebrows, eyelids, the eye that's furthest away, and then the glint of the eye closest to us. Let's focus on this eye for a few moments, just holding your attention there. And then bringing it back when the mind wanders, just back to that eye. And then turning towards the cheeks. And from the cheeks, let's look more closely at her arm. The outline of the arm. the shading, and the colors on this arm. And then let's look at the hand. Paintbrush poised, finding both the tip and the end of that paintbrush, following the handle with your eyes. And looking at the fingers that we can see, the index finger, and 2 fingers hidden in the shadows, and then the thumb with its nail, noticing the painted light reflected on that nail. And then now, perhaps for a moment, look at your own hand. The different colors, the light reflecting from the skin, perhaps also from the nails, the texture of the skin, and then allowing your thumb and index finger to touch, feeling the contact between the 2 fingers, the smoothness or roughness of the skin. And now let's come back to her hand. And from there to the whole painting. Let's rest the eyes on the painting. Getting used again to all its different elements. All the elements we looked at. The background. The position of her arms, shoulders, her head. The sleeves with their folds. The hands. The chest, the hair, the face. Now feel into your own face. How do you feel? Spending a few more moments just being with the person in this painting. A meeting of one person with another person. Or a meeting with someone from the past who's painted herself, who has become a painting. Let's come back to ourselves, feeling your body on the chair. And from there, coming back into the space around your screen. Acknowledging objects, colors, and shapes in the room you're in. So I'm now bringing the looking part to an end, but I've got some prompts for you if you want to join in with that. So I've got my pen. Hopefully you've got one at hand. We just got a few short 2 short writing prompts for you to see if you want to join in with that. So here's an opportunity to respond in your own space. The first prompt: do any colors or details stand out for you? Please write about this. Well, we have about 2 minutes for that one. 2 minutes for that prompt. And then the next prompt, and this is just from the top of your head kind of writing. We're not going to write an essay, but just some impressions and anything that comes up for you. Prompt 2, is there anything that surprises you about this painting? We'll have another minute for that. Well, that was the time for the writing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, hopefully meeting Amy and Amy. Hello.
Thank you, Lucia.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yes, we've had some comments in the chat, and one person in particular has commented on the fact that when you look at the canvas, it's very straight away you see Artemisia's face and her chest, and wondering if that's a sort of put an emphasis on the fact that it's a female artist painting this work.
Oh.
And I was actually very struck by her arm and how she's reaching out to paint, and you sort of, my eye followed her arm into her body and saw her pose, and I was thinking that's quite a pose to keep and to hold as a model. And then my mind started worrying about how she would paint that and be the model and the artist. So yes, lots of questions coming from just looking at that outstretched arm.
And did you notice any details that you hadn't seen yet, either of you? Or
Amy, you must know the painting very well. How did you find looking at it in a different way?
Yeah, a completely different experience in many ways, really focusing in on those colours and modulations. I thought it was really fascinating. And yeah, the arm is a really striking feature of the painting. And really zooming on that was really helpful.
I quite like that paintbrush that you hardly see where it ends or starts. It's just like a bit like it's sort of, yeah, I loved it. I'm just going to go behind the screens to adjust my PowerPoint.
Amy, it struck me when I was looking at it, particularly on a screen, that it looked very muted in colour. Does the green colour of her dress, does it look very different when you see the painting in real life?
It is striking when you see it in real life, but the painting is quite subtle in many ways. But yeah, I think the green does definitely stand out because there's a great massive brown, as we talked about with her dress, but also the background of the painting. And that green is quite vibrant in comparison. But it's still, a very kind of muted picture, which kind of invites close looking, as we're doing today.
Shall I share my screen again for you? Yeah.
Yeah, Lucia, if you can perhaps share just a slide of the painting, and then Amy, if you're happy to tell us a little bit more about the painting and the display. Thank you.
Yes, so just to give a bit of background first on Artemisia herself, she was very celebrated in her own day, but suffered a decline in her reputation in the intervening years. And it's kind of in the last few years that she's really gained greater recognition in this country. And that's partly due to the National Gallery's exhibition on the artist, which was the first to be staged on her in the United Kingdom. And that was just in COVID, actually, so just a few years ago. And that tied in with their own acquisition of another self-portrait of Artemisia, this time in the guise of St. Catherine. But our self-portrait of Artemisia is one of her finest paintings. In the next kind of 15 minutes or so, I want to explain why, really. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Artemisia, she was the greatest woman artist of her era, working in 17th century Italy. And training opportunities were not ample for women in this time. So women were generally not permitted to study in academies or under artists in their studios. And these were kind of the two traditional paths to becoming an artist in Italy. Along with her brothers, Artemisia trained with her father, Orazio Gentileschi, who was a well-known artist in Florence. But unlike her brothers, she forged a career independent of her father and established a practice outside her studio. So at this time, when there were many barriers for women to become artists, she succeeded and in fact gained official recognition from the establishment, becoming the first woman member of the Accademia di Disegno in Florence, and then began to work for esteemed patrons in Italy and beyond. So she worked in Rome, Florence, and Naples. And then at the invitation of Charles I, she spent around 2 years in the English court during the late 1630s. And there's evidence that the king had been trying to attract her to the city for a number of years. She joined her father, Orazio, in London. And at that time, he was court painter to Charles I. The only known firmly attributed work to Artemisia, which survives from her stay in London, is this, the self-portrait, as the Allegory of Painting. And as you may know, if you've been aware of our recent discovery of Susanna and the Elders, we've now been able to kind of put together a little bit more about her time in London. There's a lot of debate about whether Artemisia represented herself in this portrait, but it is without doubt self-referential, and her facial features are consistent with other self-portraits. She wears a brown apron over her green dress, which we've been looking at, and she seems to be kind of leaning on a stone slab, which was used for grinding pigments. And she holds, as we've seen, her brush in one hand and her palette in the other. Although she's probably best known for history, mythological, and biblical paintings, Artemisia traits throughout her career, and these were highly desirable objects by collectors. And Artemisia typically showed herself as a powerful and strong woman artist. She gained fame through her own image and undermined existing conventions of depicting women and of personifications. So, as I said, there was a bit of debate about whether this painting actually does represent Artemisia and also when the painting was produced, with kind of three main theories arising. The first is that if it was painted in 1638 to 39, when she was here in London, Artemisia would have been in her mid-40s. Others have dated it a bit earlier, to around 1630, when she would have been in her mid-30s. And there's also been an argument that the painting represents her daughter, Prudencia, who would have been in her early 20s in 1638 to 39. But despite this debate, it's been now kind of generally accepted, and certainly what we believe, that the painting represents Artemisia in around 1638 to 39 while she was in England under Charles I. The most unusual aspect of the self-portrait is how it functions as an allegory in which she presents herself as the female personification of painting. So she's not only here herself, an artist painting her own self-portrait, but she is presenting herself as the very epitome of painting itself. In Cesare Ripa's Iconologia, which was a handbook of the time, which ascribed emblems to depict allegorical figures, Ripa described the figure of painting as a beautiful woman with full black hair, dishevelled and twisted in various ways, with arched eyebrows that show imaginative thought, the mouth covered with a cloth tied behind her ears, with a chain of gold at her throat, from which hangs a mask, and is written in front, imitation. She holds in her hand a brush, and in the other, the palette, with clothes of evanescently coloured drapery. And as you can see, Artemisia follows the fundamentals of this description. She is a beautiful woman with black hair, twisted in her pose, wearing a chain of gold from which hangs a mask. She is finely dressed in a shimmering dress of two-tone silk with a lace-trimmed chemise below, and she's utterly absorbed in the act of painting, gazing beyond the canvas for inspiration. We might wonder whether she's looking at a mirror or perhaps she's assessing a model. One detail that she has left out is the detail of the mouth covered with a cloth behind the ears. And this may have been suggested by Ripa as a way of suggesting that painting itself was a mute art form. So it could not speak, but spoke words without speaking. In this painting, Artemisia does what no male counterpart would have been able to do. And she presented herself as the personification of painting. So this painting is both an allegory and a self-portrait. And some of the nuance of this innovative approach is perhaps now lost on us as contemporary viewers. In Artemisia's time, Cesare Ripa's emblems and motifs would have been very, very familiar. And so people, when they thought about painting, would have pictured his own description. So we can only now imagine how unusual it might have been at the time to see a female self-portrait and the boldness of pitching herself even closer to the true art of painting than any male painter could have done. The pose which Artemisia adopts here, which we've discussed earlier with the outstretched arm and the twisted body, is an incredibly challenging pose to depict yourself in. And perhaps after this, you might want to try putting yourself into this position. And perhaps the most interesting thing about the work is the way in which it gives us insight into how Artemisia regarded the act of painting as a physical, energetic, purposeful act, not overly contemplative or intellectual. And you can see she's got her whole body immersed into this position. The paint is confidently applied with light, rapid strokes, and a great deal of the ground, which is the base colour applied to the canvas before other pigments are put on, is left visible, suggesting areas of shadow. And the plain brown background of the painting, with great areas left empty, only places greater emphasis on the woman herself, who draws our eye completely. And I think, as one of your comments said, the real focus is on her face and her chest, which are kind of bathed in light, bringing to attention this idea of, her painting herself and her main features, but also just really emphasizing that kind of drama which you get with Italian 17th century painting, chiaroscuro, the contrast of light and dark. Below the palette, in the bottom center of the painting, if you look on close inspection, you can see Artemisia's initials, and her voice and ownership of this image really come across loud and clear. Towards the end of her life, Artemisia wrote to her patron, "Let me show you what a woman can do." And this quote, together with the portrait, demonstrate the big shift in the way that women artists depicted themselves and other women at this time. Artemisia was able to give the perspective of a woman herself rather than viewing a woman through the eyes of a man. And I think that's what's so powerful about this painting. It's not only is it a self-portrait of a woman artist, quite a rare role in 17th century Italy at this time, especially one to have become so successful as Artemisia, but also the powerful way in which she shows herself not only as a woman painting her own self-portrait, but as the very figure of painting itself. And hopefully that nuance still comes across today, even if it's a kind of language we're not so familiar with. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Amy, very much. I think we've got probably just a couple of minutes for some questions, and there's certainly been some comments in the chat about the unusual pose and the difficulty of painting like that, which made me think, Amy, could she have used a model to adopt the pose and painted then?
We think she could have used a model, but there's been some experiments with people in our team using two mirrors to see whether you can get that exact pose and see yourself. And it is possible. So it is quite possible she had two mirrors placed in front of her and then got herself in that position so she could see herself and represent herself in that way. But again, it's as she gazes into the distance, it's possible she's looking at a model as well and still trying to show her it's this kind of powerful, energetic force and the kind of amount of work and exertion that painting required.
Thank you. And we know you've mentioned this painting and obviously the newly recognised Susanna and the Elders in the Royal Collection. And I know Artemisia painted Judith, did she, with the head of Venice? Did most of her paintings, were they female figures in central positions?
Yeah, she painted a number of works which male artists would have painted as well. So for a kind of range of mythological, historical works. But there's a very strong group of female heroes that she painted, including Susanna, Judith, Lucretia, Helen. So she painted a number of these kind of well-known women from mythology and the Bible. And what we often find is quite striking is that her perspective on those is very different from a male perspective. Mm-hmm. And often you can see shadows of her own appearance in those female heroes as well. And her life story is quite complicated, but you can see how she kind of may have wanted to kind of insert herself into these narratives as a way of showing women overcoming real trauma and difficulty.
And is there much evidence surviving, any written evidence of how her portraits were perceived and whether patrons and other artists perhaps found it shocking to see these types of portrait depicted by a woman?
Interesting. I don't believe so, but we know they were highly desirable and collected. And so they weren't just painted for her own desire. Like they were highly collectible items, which ended up in quite well-respected collections. But I don't know if we have an account of someone's visceral reaction to seeing something like this.
Thank you, Amy. Lucia, any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Wow. Well, I love looking for a long time at artworks, and I really hope that people who are viewing might just try it out for themselves. When you go to a gallery, just spend 5 minutes with one painting, and yeah, it has calmed me down. So hopefully it's not the same for you if that's what was needed. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Lucia, for giving us that mindful moment, and Amy for giving us that extra context to the painting. If you are in the UK and you can travel easily to Scotland, the display is on at the Palace of Holyroodhouse up in Edinburgh. But if you are too far to travel, but you're interested in more of our digital events, then you can see some more now on your screen of the upcoming events that we're running. And please do keep an eye on our website for all different events that are running across the official residences of His Majesty the King. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.